This podcast is brought to you in part by the support of the AMTV patrons. Thank you. Hello everybody and welcome back to AMTV Radio. This is the podcast where I'm joined by a very special guest each time and we talk about, well, whatever the hell we want to, really. And for today's guest, I am joined by someone who is a big Doctor Who fan, and shall we say, if you want to know anything about figures, both official and custom, this gentleman is the man you should come to. I am joined by Captain Jimipie. Jimmy, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me here. It's lovely to do this and lovely to be doing my first podcast in such good company.
Oh, thank you, man. Yeah, this is Jimmy's first podcast, so make sure you're listening with a lot of love. It's going to be a great bit of conversation we're going to have today.
I hope so.
And as I usually do with guests to kick things off, you are Captain Jimipie on YouTube. So tell us, what's your channel all about and how did it start?
Well, it started, it's probably easier to go where it starts and rather than what it's about. It started with one of those things that I tend to be one of those people who I'll think of something to do as a hobby and then I'll do it for about a week and then I'll forget about it. And it was at a time when I sort of started to get into watching YouTube. The first one I started with was PewDiePie, like many. He was sort of the first sort of intro I had to YouTube, and obviously, whilst he's become a bit more controversial in recent years, I will admit, I'm definitely more of a fan of his earlier stuff, his game playthroughs and things like that. And I was interested in sort of looking at that, and I thought, well, that's quite an interesting thing to do, you know, game playthroughs, because I've always been a lifelong gamer. So I thought, well, I think like most people, my first thought was I could get paid to play games online.
Yeah.
And then I researched it, and you realise actually it's not how YouTube works. I liked the idea, but it was also a fact as well that when I started it, I was between jobs, so I was trying to find things to fill my time. And I always had a love of arts and crafts, and it was sort of, I hadn't really done Doctor Who custom figures before. I'd done one or two, but not many. So I sort of decided, well, I like doing the arts and crafts, and, you know, I like putting them together, and the few I had shown off, people had asked me, how did you make that? So I thought, well, there's an idea, I could record that. And the nice thing about recording it was I could record it and then speed it up, so I didn't have to worry about all the stuff, like talking over it and doing narrations. So it started there, just sort of doing tutorials and things like that. And then it got to 100 subscribers, and I thought, well, it's a modest amount. And it was just one of those things, again, I found myself with the time, so why not do it, you know, and it kept going. But it then just kept going, and it was just one of those things that it just sort of suddenly snowballed. You know, suddenly I was at 1,000, and it was like, okay, I really didn't expect that. And then now this year I've hit 10,000, and it was just, I don't understand the appeal of what I do really, because to me it's just a hobby. That's the thing. It's the one thing I've always said. It's, you know, what I do is just something just to fill my time. It's the fact that people enjoy it so much is absolutely amazing and extremely humbling. But for that reason as well, if you look at my really early stuff, there was a bit of everything. There was, you know, like sort of narrations of things, gaming videos, Doctor Who, and it's sort of, I've never described my channel specifically as a Doctor Who channel, but I'm prepared to admit that it has sort of unofficially become that, because it's just been the main focus, and that's what's built up the channel.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of one of those things that it became this huge thing that just started out as a normal hobby. So it was a bit like one of those things. It's a bit like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, because I'm 32, so I'm old. I'm trying to think of a good analogy for younger audiences. It's a bit like binge watching a series on Netflix. You start the first couple and you think, oh, I'll leave it. And then you think, I really want to know what happens now. So you carry on with it. And it was sort of the same thing with this. I started it and I did it and it just sort of passed the time. And then I thought, well, I've got the time to do it, so I'll make another video. I've got the time, I'll make another video, and so on and so forth. And it's just become this huge thing that was entirely meant just to be a thing just to pass a bit of time. And now it's become this thing that I actually do But I do, very, very small amount, but I do actually make money out of it now. And, obviously I've got things like I've got the, thing with character options. I get advanced samples from them and things like that, which is amazing. And it's all of this stuff that's come out of it. I just never expected to happen,
Yeah.
So it's a very surreal but pleasant experience.
No, I think that's the joy, isn't it? Because I think I can relate to your journey a lot on how, I mean, like for most of us, really, I think we started it, as you say, a hobby, and then something along the way just picks up traction, and then before you know it, like, yourself last year as well, I hit 10,000 subscribers as well, and you do sort of, like you say, sit back and think, people are enjoying happen? Like this hobbyist stuff I'm making just because I want to make it, and people are receiving it. I think it is a great feeling, like it, and it really, I think, shows. I think passion often comes across more for those of us who started as hobbies rather than, I think, kids now who sort of say, I'm starting this because I want to make lots of money. Because do you know what I mean? I think
I'm starting this. Well, there's the difference. There's, I'm starting this because I want to make lots of money. I hate to burst your bubble. That's not how it works. And then there's the other side of I'm starting this because I'm inspired by the people such as Adam or Jimmy or George. All these people, I'm inspired by them, and I want to do what they do. And that's really great. But I think the problem there is they don't at that point, and I think it's the same. I'm not saying this specifically of them. I'm saying this of you, me, of all of us when we started. At that point, you don't understand how much work actually goes into it. And so I think a lot of them try to start it thinking that they'll get this huge channel in the Doctor Who community, that you just, there's a lot more to it than that. And it's, like I said, it's very nice to know that you've inspired people to do these things. But at the same time, you look back on it, when you start, you look on it, you don't, I think when I started, I didn't know how much work it would entail. And now I look back and I'm honestly surprised how much work I've put into it, because, it's not, I don't want to make myself sound negative here. I am one of those sort of fairly laid back, a bit lazy people by nature.
Okay.
So I think when I look back on it and I look at how much work I've put into it, I'm slightly surprised that I've put that much effort into something.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's quite good because it's a confidence booster in the same way that I can turn around and, and you don't want to blow your own trumpet, but you can turn around to somebody and say, look, I did this. I've actually done this, and I've done it more or less, with all due respect to everyone I've collaborated with along the way, and all due respect to present company. You look at it and think the majority of what I've done myself.
Yeah.
You've put everything together. You've done all the work, and it's a very sort of big thing. So I think out of that, if I was offer advice to anybody who wants to sort of start a channel like that, is firstly and foremostly research how YouTube and things like that work, because it's I guarantee you it's not what you think it is. But if that doesn't put you off, then go for it. Never be afraid to ask other people for help, but always try and make it your own.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, well, I know I've had this before where people, have been inspired by my stuff, which again is lovely, but then they say like, oh, well, I want to do something similar. How do you think I should do it? And I'm like, it shouldn't be about what I think you should do. It should be
what
about
you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm always happy to advise or give an opinion, but it should never be like me or you driving what someone else's work should be.
Exactly,
yeah. But and as you say, you've done this for quite a while, and I did go back to the first video on your channel. I do my research. It's what every guest fears now. They've watched this enough. They're like, he's gonna go back.
Well, if I bear in mind that's just my first intro piece. I think I did, just explaining what was coming on my channel.
Yeah, late 2014 it was, which seems like a lifetime ago now.
Yeah,
But I noticed in that intro video, just because I always like to watch my guest first video just to get a gauge on it, and I noticed you said you'd come from the Doctor Who Toys Forum. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that was?
Well, the Doctor Who Toys Forum, it's still ongoing. It is still something that basically it was before I sort of started YouTube. I wanted, I was doing the occasional custom here and there, and I wanted to sort of share things, and I was getting into the figures because, contrary to what you can, I don't know the audience I can see, contrary to what you can see behind me, I didn't initially start collecting figures straight from the off. I started collecting the figures in about 2010. So it was only after that I sort of started to do the occasional one or two custom figures. And I think the the first custom figure I did was a regenerating 10th Doctor, which fell apart, and then I put it back together. It's somewhere here. But the next one I did was my Night of the Doctor, 8th Doctor, before the official figure release, and I wanted to sort of get, you know, people's opinions on figures, and it was at a time when I looked up and still very much look up to the likes of Tom Fan. I don't know if you're familiar with his custom work.
Rings a bell.
It's absolutely phenomenal, and I knew he was on the forum, so it was sort of joining the forum to share other, you know, like-minded people and seeing what they think, and again getting ideas and, you know, getting other people's perspectives and things like that. But also because in my head I was thinking, well, if I'm going to be making more custom figures, I need to be aware of what's out there and, you know, what figure parts and things like that. So again, a forum dedicated to Doctor Who toys was a really good idea. To cut a very long-winded story short on the forum, I was for a time the mod of the forum section.
Okay.
It's fair to say I had my fair share of issues with some things on there, some of which I will hold my hands up and say probably were definitely my fault. Other ones, there was at least one particular user on there. I won't dwell on this, but basically they had issues with lots of people, and they were effectively permanently banned after a while because of their behaviour. But after a while, I found myself going on there a bit less, so I've sort of semi-left the forum now. I'm not a section mod anymore, and I don't post on it. But that's where I started, because I looked at it and think, well, people are sharing this stuff on the forum, which is great. But the thing about a forum is it is only if you're part of that forum. And so I looked at it and thought, well, the stuff that I'm learning and the stuff that I'm doing, it's great to get the feedback on the forum, but it would be nice to see what a wider audience makes of it. So I thought about doing things like, you know, I obviously already had a Twitter and Facebook, but again, that's sort of a single social media. Whereas with YouTube, because of the way at the time, the way its algorithms worked, it would send out what you had made to more people, and it was a way to reach a much wider audience. And it was one of those things that, again, because I was into YouTube at the time and I sort of thought about it, and I thought, you know, I'd like to do this. Oh, it's not quite what I thought, but I'd still like to do it anyway. But then it was at a point where I knew I was going to do the custom stuff, but I knew I couldn't just solely do that. So I basically did a bit of everything, some of which have just completely more or less gone from my channel, such as the gaming videos. They pop up occasionally, usually when it's a Doctor Who game. But the majority of the stuff that I sort of started with, a good few of them are still there. Like I think I originally started off with obviously the customs, the fan theories, and the did you knows. I think are the ones that have stuck around, and all of the other ones have sort of been lost over time. And this year I'm sort of semi-retiring my Wildcard Wednesday, because it just got to the point where that's sort of the whole point of that was, it was something I think on a Wednesday I'll do whatever I want and it'll be fun. And it got to the point where I could do whatever I want, but it stopped being fun having to do everything every week. So I think, again, just slightly going back to the YouTube thing, you've got to, it's great to keep the content you want to do going, but you've got to keep it fresh. You've got to, the minute you stop enjoying it, there's no point in doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I know I've had that in the last, towards the end of 2020, like some of the, I'd say, shows on my channel that drew in the most viewership, I just, I'd done for a very long time, and I guess I'd sort of had a bit of burnout from it, I suppose. So I've sort of gone with, like, I'm not saying they'll never come back, but I need like a long time away. I'm talking shows where I'd done like 100+ episodes like every week, and it's sort of like, well, you need a gap from that sort of stuff. But I mean, it's nice to hear you say that the forum's still going on, because I know YouTube, obviously, with all its positives, killed off a lot of forums, like in the late 2000s. Obviously, as you say, the nature of the wider audience. Why keep it to one thing when you can branch out? But it's nice to hear that it's still going for those who are dedicated to it.
Well, that's in a way, I think that's one of the positive things about the Doctor Who Toys forum is, I mean, I sort of semi left it because it stopped being fun for me. So I thought, I don't want to stick around if it's, I don't want to stick around because I feel like I have to. That's the point. But it is worth saying, again, all due respect to the mods that do remain, but a lot of the moderators sort of just left. They disappeared, and even the main moderator who runs it only pops in every now and again. So you sort of think for a forum that's a sort of signal of death. But the thing about the Doctor Who Toys forum is the few mods that do remain and its users are the ones that have kept it going, and they've not let it sort of succumb to anything. You know, and it really is great to see that the community is still going, because for all of its issues it's had over the years and arguments and things like that, it's always sort of got back to a level of sort of semi-normality where things, you know, people have calmed down, you know, people who've had issues have left, people who've, you know, have sort of accepted their differences. And I think that's partly my reason for stepping back as well, is you know, I as I said, I will hold my hands up and say that, you know, I did have my issues at the time, and I think that was part of the reason I thought this all depends on the perspective. I wouldn't like to think that I particularly instigated any issues, but obviously if you ask the people on the other side, I'm sure they say I would. You know, I'm not pointing fingers here, I'm just saying that is a fact. It depends on whose side you ask. But I think that I looked at it and I thought, the thing here is issues I'm having because I'm here. So if I remove myself from it, that's one less. You know, I'm not going to have the issues if I'm not present in the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not saying that, you know, I wanted to leave because I had issues with this. I said I still pop in every now and again, and, you know, there's a few, you know, some of the main people who've sort of taken on the mantles of the main mods I've got very good, you know, sort of internet friendships with. You know, they're always very accommodating and always happy just to have a chat and things like that. But like I said, I think it's one of those things that it's a great place to go back and visit, but I can't see myself going back there permanently, just simply because if I go back there permanently, all of the old things start to float to the surface again. You know, and it's not a negative point against the forum, because it's, you know, it's worth saying if I go onto the forum, all the things will float back to the surface. But you can stop that. I can stop that happening by not being there.
Yeah. So
exactly. You know, it's not. I'm not trying to say. You know, I'm not trying to say it's my fault, but I'm also not saying it's not my fault. It's the contributing factor is me being there. So if it means avoiding any conflict, it's better for me not to be there and just occasionally pop up and say, "Hi guys, just checking in," and that's it.
Yeah.
You know?
No, absolutely, and I think it's a lesson like we can all sort of take in terms of any sort of social media. I know a lot of us have done it over the years where we've either had to take a break from certain sites because, say, of like, you know, conflicts and stuff. But I think that's that's just part of like learning and growing and knowing yourself as well, which is really useful. But in terms of the custom figures specifically, which I know is a big part of your channel,
yes,
as you say, like
understatement.
Understatement, yeah. But the first one that you said you did was like the 10th Doctor regenerating.
Yes.
So what sort of which he's trying to find now for those.
I don't know where he is. He's here somewhere. He's down there somewhere. Yes, but yes, it was the first one I did.
Yeah, and what sort of what sort of sparked what made you say this is what I want to do? Were you dissatisfied that there wasn't an official toy, or did you just think this would be good for? Do you know what I mean? Like, what was the spark that sort of drove making customs?
Well, it definitely wasn't dissatisfaction. I can't say that word. The word you just said, it definitely wasn't that. Yeah. No, I think it was just more, I've always been interested in arts and craft. The thing is, I was never hugely into Doctor Who as a kid. Like, I liked it. Bearing in mind, this is going back to, I was born in 1988. So my first memory of Doctor Who was, it was that image of the sea devils coming out of the water.
Oh, nice.
And that was my first, because would have been the early 90s, and I would have been sitting there flicking through channels, and I would have been BBC Two, and the Sea Devil. I just got this image of the Sea Devils, and I remember watching the rest of it. And for years, I thought, I've got to be imagining. I can't believe that I can remember that so vividly. I thought, I must be imagining this. But then not last year, the year before, I was talking about it to somebody, and they did a quick Google search, and they found that the Sea Devils was repeated on the 90s on BBC Two. So it definitely happened, which was nice to have that validated.
Yeah.
But no, I was never hugely into it. I was aware of what it was, and when the TV movie, the dreaded TV movie, was out in 1996, I was really hyped for it, and I enjoyed it, and I think that's why I'm probably one of the few people who's willing to give it a pass, because it's got a sense of nostalgia to it. It's not the best episode, but it means a lot to me. And then 1999's Doctor Who Night, and then when it came back in 2005, I really got into it. But it was throughout all that time, I was always interested in arts and crafts from a young age. You know, whether it was just sort of things like doing paper craft, just printing off things and making them. My granddad installed in me a love of model railways, so that was something I was interested in from an early age. So there's always been an arts and crafts thing that I've always been interested in. So when it came to the idea of doing custom figures, because I didn't start collecting the figures until about 2010, because I think one of the first figure sets, I think I bought the 10th Doctor's electronic TARDIS and a 10th Doctor figure, and I think I bought a Dalek.
As we all did.
Yeah.
As we all did.
But that was it. You know, I just sort of bought those ones. And then in 2010, they released, obviously the 11th Doctor came along, and they released the Crash sets with the Raggedy 10th Doctor, and I got that. And then there was the 11th Doctor set, which was the first release of the 8th Doctor figure. And so I got that, and I had them just lined up on a shelf, and that was it. That was all my collection was ever going to be. That went well. He says, pointing to his collection behind him.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting it's not video. But yeah, so it was at that point that I sort of looked at it, and I thought, well, I've always been interested in doing arts and crafts. And I think, like most kids, you know, at some point I had like an Action Man or something, and I decided to, you know, it's like, you know, I had an Action Man, and I think at one point I decided to paint his arms silver, because I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if he had like a robot arm? And it was just sort of that sort of thing, that it just became a thing you did as a kid. But then when the figures came out, and I sort of started looking at it, and I sort of looked at it, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be a great idea if you did actually have a Doctor Who figure, you know, the 10th Doctor in his regenerating pose with the fire coming out of him, and it was this case of thinking that would be great to see. And it wasn't me going, oh, I wish they'd produced that. It was, oh, I'd love to see that. And then I just thought, well, why don't I make it? So I got a 10th Doctor figure, hacked him to pieces, used very, very rough modelling clay to make it. And I made it, and then it sat in the bottom of a box for about 10 years before I dug it out and made it again recently using new parts. But that was sort of where it started, is it was a case of just thinking, it wasn't a case of thinking, oh, I wish we had that as a figure. It was, I'd like to see that. So I'll make it myself, you know, and that's sort of, it's very much the same sort of way that the things have progressed. There's a lot of, majority of figures on my shelves are ones which I don't make them because we don't have an official one. I make them in lieu of having an official one. You know, it's not because I want it. It's not because I'm disappointed we haven't got an official one, but I look at it and think, there's a gap in my collection. I'll make it, you know. And there's several figures that I've made over the years that have now become redundant because we have had official ones. But I don't see them as redundant because, you know, that's a common point I get when I make a figure and then an official one comes out. You do get people saying, "Oh, it's a bit pointless now. It's a bit redundant." It's like, well, it's not, because I've still enjoyed the process of making it, and that figure, whilst there might be an official one and certainly better made, will always be special to me because I'll be able to look at that back on that one day, thinking, I made that. I put the work into that, and everything that's there is something I did.
Yeah, I think it's that sense of, I guess, as you say, like creating something. Because like, whilst, you know, if they make an official figure, it's something you can go out and buy or whatever. But I think as a creative myself, I've never made a figure, but just in terms of anyone who's ever created anything should know the joy of, as you say, looking back at something, be like, I made that. So I completely understand where you're coming from there. And I mean, as it took off on the channel, like, because the ones the ones I skimmed through that you've shown off, to me at least, look pretty high quality. But I mean, how you've probably stressed it in the past, but sort of how long does like a rough process take to make a custom? I know it might vary depending on what you're doing, but is there like an average time, would you say?
It is very, very much a how long is a piece of string question, because it varies from figure to figure. So, for example, it all depends on the figure. So, for example, like, let's say if I was doing, if I wanted to do an 11th Doctor with a slightly different coloured bow tie, well, that's maybe an hour or so to repaint the bow tie, that's it. But obviously when you get into doing things like the sculpting work and stuff like that, you're talking potentially days, if not weeks, sometimes, depending on what you're doing. And it's, for example, one that I've always used is painting a Dalek. Now, just painting the spheres on the side of a Dalek, the average for me, it usually works out as 20 to 40 minutes to paint one half of the sphere, to paint the spheres on one side. Let that dry, which is usually about 10 to 20 minutes. Then you might need another coat. That's another 40 minutes. Then you've got to let that dry. Then you've got to do the other side. So just painting the spheres on a Dalek could take a good 2 to 3 hours. I mean, I've had some that just repaint it. So repainting a whole Dalek, you might be looking at 8 to 10 hours max. But I think for me, the fundamental is it's not how long it takes. It's how far you're prepared to go to get the results you want. And I think that's one of the fundamental rule when I've ever been asked what do you recommend, how do you recommend to do customs, is I've said never set yourself a time limit, because the simple fact is the longer you take, the better your results will be. And also, the more practice you put in, the better your future results will be. Yeah. So I think it is a difficult question to answer how long it takes, because it depends on the project. But I think if I had to, it takes as long as it takes. So I always thought of, have you ever seen the film, I can't remember, it's Charlton Heston, it's Agony in the Ecstasy. It's all about Michelangelo.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I know it.
There's basically there's the famous scene. He's painting the Sistine Chapel, and the Pope guy is constantly asking him, when will it be finished? And Michelangelo's response is, when it's done.
Yeah, and
absolutely. That's the sort of prime thing that's always stuck in my head when it's making customs. Is people say like, oh, how long is that going to take you? However long it takes. And it is one of those things that you don't put a definable time on it, because the minute you put a time limit on it, it becomes, it goes from becoming a hobby to a job. I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
A hobby should never have a time limit.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's that, I think partly, I know I've had this before, I don't know if you have, it's that sort of subconscious pressure when you've done YouTube long enough, you get in a rhythm and views are coming in and whatnot. And I think sometimes there's that pressure of oh, right, so, I happen to have done these 2 videos on a Wednesday. That means I have to now always do them on a Wednesday. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of subconscious making it a schedule when, as you say, really, it shouldn't be like that. It should be, I'll post it when I post it, sort of thing.
Well, I sort of slipped into that in YouTube. I didn't plan to do that, but that's what happened, because the Wildcard Wednesday was just an idea of thinking, well, any idea, if I can't think of anything, I'll just pick any idea off the top of my head. It could be absolutely anything, and I'll post it on that day, and that was the set day. But then it sort of became, I would do a custom video every Saturday, and then I'd do a Doctor Who video every Friday, and it wasn't. I didn't set out to have that schedule, but it just sort of fell into place, and it works. It's a schedule that works. I mean, now, as of this year, my schedule is Wildcard Wednesday, whenever I have an extra upload, always a Doctor Who video on Friday, and then a custom video every other Saturday, and that's the schedule now. That was not my schedule when I started, and in another 5 years' time, if I'm still doing YouTube, then it's probably not going to be the schedule then. But I think, you have to, as you said, you've got to sort of, there has to be a sort of, it's nice to have a structure, but at the same time, you've got to be prepared to sort of have it sounds like one of those team building exercises, but a dynamic flow to to what you do.
I agree.
Because you don't want to be too set in stone, because then the minute you set one thing in stone, you've got to set the next thing in, and so on and so forth. Whereas if everything is in a state of flux and everything changes, you can say, well, I was going to do that then, but I'm going to do that then instead, and things like that. So I think it's finding that good mix of having it's nice to have the structure, but it's a structure that you can rebuild.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And with the figures, something I did, as soon as I knew you were coming on, this was something I wanted to ask you. So
ask away.
For you, what is your favourite figure, both, now splitting into 2 separate questions, what is your favourite officially released figure, whether it be by, Character Options, the BBC, whoever, and then your favourite custom figure that you've made?
I'll start with the custom figure one, because that's an easier question to answer, because I can't really answer it as such, because it varies. So it varies depending on the figures I make. I suppose I've probably got more than one favourite, because I don't tend to have favourites in the sense of, oh, I really enjoyed making that. My favourites are the ones where I can see my own progression. And one of the ones that was really sort of stood out for me is my very first version I made of my Peter Cushing Doctor Who from the movies, because the paintwork on the body on that, I looked at that and I thought, do you know what? That's really clean, and I'm really surprised I've done it that well. So there's plenty of ones like that I sort of look at it and I think that's a personal achievement on that side. My custom Recon Dalek I made before the official version came out, that was one of the most extensive sculpting things I'd done. And whilst it was quite inaccurate, I was still very pleased with the work I'd done on that. So I think I don't have a single favourite. I've got several different favourites depending on what I do. And I mean, there's sort of several ones that I finish off that I'm quite pleased with the way that they've come out, because it's sort of in fact it's sort of that's become a bit of a running catchphrase. I'm very pleased with how this has come out, but it's true because every custom I make has always got some progression. I look at some of my really early ones. Well, put it this way, my second custom figure, which was my Night of the Doctor, 8th Doctor, that's literally fallen apart and is in pieces now, and I've repurposed the parts for other things. Because when I made it, I was just sticking it together with huge amounts of hot glue and PVA, and the paintwork was awful compared to now. But the whole point is I look at that and think that shows the learning curve I've gone on and the things that how my work's progressed. So it's nice to sort of see that. So I suppose you could say my favourite customs are the ones that show my level of work progression. You know, it can't define it to one. It's a bit like a list of your favourite foods. You like each of them individually for different reasons, sort of things. As far as an official figure goes, that is a very difficult question to answer for those who can't say I am actually looking, see what I can find. An official figure release, I would have to say, actually, is this fellow, the big 18-inch Supreme Dalek. It's probably my favourite official release because they are... Firstly, they're quite rare and difficult to get hold of now, but it was one of those things, I think at the moment, it's the closest I'll get to owning a full-sized Dalek. But it is one of those things that it's a very nice figure. There's a lot to it. But again, even now, I'm looking at them over and I'm looking at them thinking, oh, actually, I do quite like that one, and I quite like that one. So again, I think it's a very difficult. That's an off the top of my head choice, the 18-inch Supreme Red Dalek. But there's lots of other ones that I sort of look at and think, do you know what? Actually, I do quite like that version. I do quite like that, and you know, it's the different ways we've sort of got things and the different.
It's curious, isn't it? Because like as you say, like yourself, it could be a number of answers. Whereas I know for me, like my favourite official figure, I'm looking at him up there, Christmas 2005. So for me, I got into Doctor Who with the revival. I was in that prime age group, 9 years old sort of thing. And I got into the classics pretty quickly after that. And the image that always struck me for some reason was the Imperial Daleks. Yeah. That white and gold livery. I don't know what it was. I was like, I like that. I want that. And I think it was either Sci-Fi Collector or Galaxy 4, one of those sites at the time, just released, or they were stocking the, remote control Imperial Dalek. And I was like, that's what I want for Christmas. That is going on my list. So, so he's up there. I can see him still up there. And I mean, he doesn't work anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like,
it's just nice to have a display piece. Well, the majority of the 18-inch Daleks I've got, a lot of them I bought as spares and repairs. I think, including the Supreme, I've only got 2 that actually work, because they were inherently flawed in their design, but they still make great display pieces, Oh,
absolutely! Like I just like, as I say, I'm looking at him now, but I just like having him there. He's a nice.
No, exactly.
It's
one of those things you just sort of look at it and you sort of think, it's one of those things that I think. Well, I don't know if it's the same for you, but it's one of those things I look at it and I think, one of these days, when I'm old and I'm sat there in my chair quivering because I'm like ancient. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to look over to my collection. And I'm going to think, I dread to think how much I've spent on that, but you know what? It was worth it.
Absolutely.
Because they say you can't put a price on happiness, but you can. It's $12.99 for an action figure.
That's the roundabout way of looking at it. I agree. And like on those action figures, I know for a lot of people, including myself, because I was never really into, I guess, getting figures, for collection purposes until quite recently with those curse you B&M with your exclusive sets. But even then, like my story with it is, I was never that bothered about them at first until again they released the Coal Hill set, and there's an Imperial Dalek, and I'm like, ooh, I like that.
I want that.
So I was like, I got that, and of course in my B&M there was a few other sets. I was like, ooh, there's Peter Capaldi and Davros. Ooh, there's Peter Davison with his TARDIS. Ooh, okay. And now I've sort of got, what's available basically. I haven't yet descended to paying like, stupid prices for sets, but I'm just sort of grabbing like whatever's in B&M that I like the look of. Cool, we'll do that. But I mean, in terms of those, because obviously for anyone who doesn't know, the B&M ones are exclusive to B&M. They've got some sort of deal going on, and a lot of them are limited edition. Because I think you could look at that as a two-edged sword, because, like in the late 2000s, Doctor Who toys were everywhere because it was so big, you could get them dime a dozen. Whereas now, like, yes, I know they're still releasing Jodie era ones and stuff, but they're less common to find in supermarkets, toy shops, whatever. So with the B&M ones, do you think there's like the plus and the negative of them being limited edition? Because let's face it, like when they do each of the sets, you see people online saying, I'd really love this, but either I don't have a B&M near me, or my B&M's really small.
Or somebody's walked out the store with a whole lot of them.
Which does happen for anyone who doesn't know. Amazingly, there will be people who will go in, grab whatever is on the shelf, and take it to the till, and they'll be like, what are you doing? So basically, what do you think of those B&M sets? Because I know they're quite popular, obviously, in the community for what they do. But I'd be curious to know your thoughts on them.
I have no problem with it. The interesting thing, the first thing I'll raise is the whole idea of them being limited edition is, well, this is, I want to make it clear, I am repeating things that I have read online that have been said, but I have no reason to doubt the sources these have come from. The limited edition stickers, the gold stickers on them, were a stipulation by B&M. It doesn't actually mean they are limited, so that they I think they're produced in units of like 6,000 each. Again, I'm just quoting, but that is an average unit for most figures. So the limited edition stickers were there as a selling point. I don't think it actually makes them limited edition, but people have decided they are. But obviously, to be fair, they're limited in the sense of they only produce so many, but you can say that of any product. I think the addition of the limited edition stickers has certainly made them more sought after. And I can understand the reason for B&M wanting that as a selling point, because that's fair enough. But I don't... The sets themselves, I have no problem with them at all. I know some people have said, like, about them using old figure sculpts to make new ones and things like that. But I'm sort of quite fortunate in that I'm in a position where I have been able to talk to people at character options and things like that about, having conversations about things. And whilst a lot of the manufacturing process is obviously a very closely guarded secret, they can't say how much gets spent on this, how much gets spent on that. It is just a simple fact, and it's just logical fact, that they do have to do what they can do within a limited budget, and the production of action figures has become more costly. And you look at the big companies, I see a lot of people say, like, well, you look at what NECA do or what McFarlane do, and it's like, yeah, but they're big American companies. This is a small British toy-making company who might produce their things in China, but they're still subject to what their budget is in the UK. And I think the way that they've done it using existing figures is, yes, it means that they're slightly inaccurate, but when you look at how they use them and what they've done, it's a great example of how well it works. Because you look at, one of the most recent ones, which isn't on my shelf, but it's the second release of the Romanas set and had the Sarah Jane figure in it.
Oh yes,
But it's like you look at that and they've got new pieces on that, but all of them are using the same boot sculpt. And it's only when you look at it and you think, actually, that is the same boot sculpt. But the point is, you pick it up. That's not the first. You don't pick it up and go, oh, that's the same boot sculpt. I'm not having that. It shows how well using existing parts can work and how easily they can be disguised with different things. And I think the idea of the B&M sets is great, because I think it's a shame that they are so exclusive to B&M. I think that is the main downside, that many people who don't have a B&M near them can't get to them, and obviously people outside the UK can't get to them. But obviously now they've got their international distribution with Australia and the US going. So I think it's moving in the right direction. It is a bit of a shame that they're not as available to everyone, and it's certainly, I don't condone in the slightest those people that go out there, buy up a load of sets and then sell them on. That's just disgraceful behaviour. But I think it's a great way of keeping the range going because, again, a rumour, I want to make it clear, I'm just repeating rumour here, is I've heard, and I'm not confirming this as fact, that when the character options were looking at sort of not rebooting the range but continuing it, they went to a lot of stores, like Toys R Us, who was still going at the time, and other stores, and a lot of them weren't interested in the Doctor Who range. B&M were the only ones that were interested. So the idea that they've given exclusive partnership to B&M isn't possibly necessarily strictly true. It could be that B&M were the only ones that were interested.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's a situation that is not perfect for anybody. But I think the bottom line is, the situation is, not everyone can get to the sets, and the sets are, in all fairness, slightly inaccurate with what they release. But the flip side of that is we are continuing to get, we are getting figures, new classic figures. We're getting companions and like the Romanas. No one ever thought you'd get the Romana sets. You know, that was insane to think you'd get that. So to get those things and the re-release of the Imperial Daleks, you know, everyone was. Nobody thought that would ever happen. So you've got to sort of look at it and say, okay, it's not exactly what I wanted, but we're still getting it, and we're still lucky to be getting those things. I think that's the bottom line of the B&M sets is it exactly what we want? No. Are we still getting things? Yes. And I'd rather have something that was slightly inaccurate that I'd always wanted than not have it at all. And again, I think the nice thing about the B&M sets as well is it's a thought off the top of my head, but the Doctor Who customising figure community has grown a lot over recent years, and I think part of that, in at least the last 3 or 4 years, is because people have been correcting the B&M figures. And I'm not saying that as a mark against character options. I understand why the figures were incorrect. But in a way, I think that's great because it gets more people into doing something creative by trying to make it what they actually wanted it to be.
Yeah. No, and I mean, as you say, like, despite any flaws or inaccuracies, I think it's like you're saying, they're putting things out now, especially fans of like the classic era would have like dreamed of. Like, I mean, recently I was lucky to get the Second Doctor War Games set with that TARDIS, and I've always thought that TARDIS is gorgeous, like the fonts on the doors and the white thing where the police box. Do you know what I mean? Just the whole look of it. I'm like, I like this, and the fact that there is now a figure of that you can buy in a shop is just, to me, that's mind blowing. But yeah, you're right though. I think it is partly like the whole it's people's access, isn't it? Because you can't buy a lot of them. You can't buy online, as far as I know, anyway. But like for example, I got the Imperial set from my B&M, but it was my girlfriend who lives in Manchester, who her B&M was like one of those mega stores, you know, and she rings me up and says, oh, they've got like 8 different sets. So it's like, you know, it's really that case of, I guess, how big your store is and what they get in and how often they get it. But yeah, it's but I'm totally in agreement with you, like you say, about the fact we're still getting new figures and like classic figures as well. Like I know they sort of did that in like the late 2000s, like they do the odd, oh look, it's the classic Doctor with X monster set, which were cool. But you know, in terms of getting it then,
a regular stream of classic figures now, which is
exactly. It's really like just changed for the better.
Just going back to what you were saying about the availability thing, I'm very much in the same boat. I'm in North Devon. I'm in a very, very sort of rural area of North Devon, and I've literally we've literally only just got a B&M up the road, which opened in January. The nearest one for me is 30 miles away, and that's a sort of gardening centre one. So they do have toys and things, but they don't always get it in. My partner, she lives, again, 30 miles away in the other direction, but she's got a proper B&M megastore, so she's always keeping an eye out and letting me know, oh, they've got this, they've got that. Usually I've already got it, but it's nice to know that they've got it there. But I've found there's quite a few people, particularly, who I've found, I can sort of drop a message to somebody on Twitter or Facebook and say, "Oh, I'm having trouble getting this set. Can you, if I give you the money and it's in your nearest store, because these are people who are in cities, they've got like 5 stores near them. I say, is there any chance you could go out and, if you're going out near one, could you have a look for me?" And they go, "Yeah, no problem." And it's nice that it's brought people together on that side of things, because even during lockdown, where they were releasing sets and I was finding it impossible to get them because I was isolating, I sent out messages. There's a guy, Dave Shepherd, you might know of him. He's the guy that does VorkCon and things like that. And I've been chatting to him a bit, and there's been a few times when, on lockdown, I said, I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but if you are going out and you are going near a V&M, could you have a look? And I said, obviously, if it's putting you in any risk and you're not planning to go out, don't. And he says, no, it's fine. I've got to go out at some point. And he, and it's fantastic, because you look at it and think, like, with everything horrible that's going on in the world right now and the amount of horrible people that are out there, it's nice that you just look at it and think that restores your faith in humanity a bit, that people are willing to band together. And I think that's the nice thing about the thing with the B&M sets within the Doctor Who community. The B&M sets have brought people together in that way, because I sometimes, like, when you go on Doctor Who, like, sales pages on Facebook, I've seen posts from people saying, "Oh, I've gone to my local B&M, I've bought 5 of these sets, drop me a message and I'll sell it to you at the retail price."
Oh, okay.
Specifically for that's the point. That's my first thought. Is exactly the thought. Is when I first read that post, I say, "Oh, I've bought 5 of the sets." You go, "Oh, God," and then you read the rest of it, and they say, "No, I'm willing to sell them on a retail price to people that can't get them." And you think, see, those are the kind of people that should be going in the stores and buying up all the sets. The ones that are actually then willing to sell them on at recommended prices.
Yeah, if only everyone did that.
If only.
But I think one of the most prolific releases from character in the last year, of course, was the, as they called it, the Jungles of Mechanus set. Yes. Which, of course, for anyone who doesn't know, featured 2 movie Daleks. We can't call them movie Daleks.
Open
but they
quote,
are
movie Daleks, close quote.
And fair play to character for, like, wrangling it in that way without specifically saying, "These are Doctor Who and the Daleks," but basically giving us Doctor Who and the Daleks.
Well, that's all to do with an episode loophole, which is a brilliant way of doing it. Fantastic. That's a masterstroke on their part.
And I just think, but I remember that one when they announced it, that was online only, which on one hand I was like, fair enough. And I got mine, I pre-ordered it, I did it all correctly and stuff. But I mean, my opinion on that is, as we just discussed, like, sometimes it's hard enough to find it in person anyway. But would you argue online exclusivity makes it more likely that those bad eggs in the community will, like, just add 10 to a cart?
Well, I mean, I could be wrong here, because I'm thinking back. In the back of my mind, I get the feeling that character did limit how many you could buy per customer. I'm not sure what that limit was, because I know for a fact, because I tried doing it to see if it could be done. I bought 2, one to keep boxed and one to open. And then I will admit, I bought a third one for the purposes of customizing them. And I seem to remember that it did allow me to order more than 2 that way. So I don't think there was a customer limit of 2. I think if you're going to do anything like that in future with exclusives, it is worth putting them a limit per only. Another good example is the Big Finish sets, the ones that Big Finish exclusively released. I was lucky enough to get 3 of them in, but again, those were limited to 1 each per customer, because there's only 150 of them. And I look at it and think, that's what they need to do. Anything exclusive like that in future, you limit it to so many per customer to ensure that everyone can get them. And I think it's a good idea for the fans, but at the same time, I can understand the company's unwillingness to do that, because the bottom line is they do have to make the sales. And and the thing is, like, I've seen, this is another example where I've seen people, where Character Options release a figure, and people come up and said, "Oh, it's not completely accurate. I'm not going to buy that." They don't buy it, which means less sales, which means the budgets go down, which means less, more accurate produced figures. So Character Options then have to release a slightly less accurate figure using new parts, and the people go, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Why aren't they giving us more accurate things?" They're not giving you more accurate things because you're not buying them. Yeah, I'm not saying that's the whole. I'm not saying that's exactly how it works.
No, but it's a part of it.
But it's a part of it. So I think the exclusivity idea is great because it means that character options can market them within house. You know, they're not. Exclusives work well for them. I'm certainly hoping we'll see some more in future. At the moment, obviously, the Mechanists one's the only one we've had. You know, I'm hoping that we do some more in future because for them, it means they haven't got to pay out a portion of that to B&M because obviously they've got to pay. You know, they've got to pay out to the BBC for licensing and things like that, and then B&M take a cut of the sales and they get a cut of the sales, and it works well like that. But it makes sense that they haven't kept the range solely exclusive to them because they need it to reach more people, such as being able to get it in stores. So yeah, I'm on the fence when it comes to the exclusivity things. I can perfectly understand why they do it, but I can also understand people's apprehensions with it. But you're never going to be able to please both sides. So you're better off keeping it how it is. And as horrible as it is to say, the simple fact is if you miss out on getting them, so be it. You should have been quicker. And it's a horrible thing to say, I know, but it's just that those are just the facts. You know, it's one of those things that if somebody misses out on getting it, don't be angry at the people that did manage to get it. You know, it's not their fault that they managed to get it. I mean, if you're going to be angry at somebody, be angry at the people that do buy up 10 sets and then go and try to flog them on. Those are the people to be angry at. But just the people who just managed to get, say, 2 or 3 sets that they don't plan to sell on, that they bought for their own personal collection, leave them be. Be angry at the people who are buying them up and trying to flog them on. I mean, even now, you go on eBay and there's, bearing in mind they are out of stock, but there's Mechanist sets on eBay for sort of 50, 60 quid. And it's like, okay, they're out of stock now. So I appreciate that they now are sought after for that value. But they were on there before they'd even gone up on character options for that price.
I saw that, yeah.
There's people selling them for 50, 60 quid. And it's like, you do realise they're $19.99 or whatever they were from character options. They're not that price, you know.
No, exactly. Well, all I can say is here's to more sets in 2021. Let the good trends continue, at least.
Fingers crossed.
I've got a user from Twitter who had a few questions for you. This is the stylish one who's at his Doctor Who style, so very stylish as we can gather from this.
Quite.
And their questions are: the first one is favorite classic series and why.
Favorite classic series or series or episode? Series. I'll answer that 2-part. So series, I do have a fondness for Trial of a Time Lord. Because it's not that it hasn't got the best episodes. Let's admit, but I've always loved the Valeyard as a character, and I loved what he represented. So I think it's as a whole series. Put it this way, I like Trial of a Time Lord when you cut out all of the boring filler stories in between, all the stuff with the Valeyard and the Doctor. That's what I like.
Okay, yeah.
But a favourite episode, I think it does have to be the Sea Devils, just purely because when it comes to Doctor Who, that image of them coming out of the water is the one thing that has been absolutely ingrained into my mind since I can remember. It's one of those things that everyone has a sort of first memory. I mean, for me, the earliest memory I can remember is being in a grocery shop with my mum and she's given me an apple to eat. That's the earliest memory. But after that, I think it is the memory of the Sea Devils in Doctor Who. So it's always got a special place to me. You know, it's one of those stories that I rewatch occasionally, and every now and again when I do rewatch it, I think it's not a bad story. It's not one of the ones that's right up there on probably most people's lists, but I can't not love it for that reason because it's so important to me. Yeah,
I'm exactly the same with the Three Doctors because that was my first ever classic Who story. And, you know,
good choice.
You look at it now, it's not perfect. Some things look a bit wobbly or a bit rubbish. The gel guard, sorry, is what I'm thinking of, or whatever you call them. But again, for a 9-year-old watching that, my imagination went wild.
Yeah.
And, like, no matter how you can bash it, I will always be positively biased towards the Three Doctors just because of how important it is. So I relate to that sentiment completely. The second question was... what figure was the hardest / took the longest to make?
Well, again, hardest. Again, that sort of depends on the different ones. The one that took the hardest and took the longest to make. I'd probably actually have to say, my Recon Dalek, my Revolution Recon Dalek, the one before the official version came out, just simply because it wasn't necessarily it certainly took the longest because the amount of sculpting work. I was sculpting things on top of other things, so I had to wait for them to dry, and average drying time can be anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. But it was so that was the hardest part, is just the time it took. Sorry, that was the time that took the longest. It wasn't necessarily the most challenging, but it was certainly it wasn't the most challenging to make, but it was the most challenging idea that I'd had to do so far. So I think that's probably the one that would jump out to me immediately, because it was a sort of semi-baptism of fire, in the sense of that I'd done sculpting things before, and I'd made full sculpts and things like that, but that really was quite literally building it from scratch.
Ah, well, there you go. There's some insight into that one. And the last question they had was, I guess we sort of touched on this earlier, but I can let you elaborate further. Their question is, what figure that you've made are you most proud of? And again, I know that might not be one specific figure, but which. Yeah.
I suppose it does sort of come back to the same thing of it being, it's a range of figures that show the progression. But I think if I was sort of to sort of pick one that just sort of really stands out as one that I am proud of, then just picking one off the top of my head, I would probably say my Dark Eyes 8th Doctor, because I did make one originally. Again, ironically, the first one I made years and years and years and years ago was using the 9th Doctor body, because it was the closest one there was. Cut to years later, that's exactly what character options did. but I decided to make one using sort of the I used one of the primeval coats and then sculpted on so the coat was closed and things like that. And again, it's just one of those ones that when I'd finished it, I stood back and I looked at it and I thought, do you know what? The work I've done on that's really smooth. It's really well painted. There's no overlap, and it's just one of those ones that I think, I'm proud of that. So I think it does vary. Next week it could be something else that I've made, but there's quite a few of them that, like I said, there's a progression range of them. But if I had to pick one off the top of that range, it'd probably be the Dark Eyes 8th Doctor.
There you go, stylish one. I hope you are happy with those answers, you stylish soul. And Dark Eyes is just a beautiful story as well. I love the Dark Eyes saga. And I have something to ask, which I'm trying to do more regularly on the show. Yes. I've named it My First, My Last, My Everything, in tribute to the great Barry White. But don't worry, I will not be singing today. So it's basically, we've touched upon your first, which is my first being my first Doctor Who story. And would you say that was probably the Sea Devils then?
I would, yeah. Well, it's the first in the fact that it is the first thing I ever saw. So I'd be inclined to say the first full story I really remember watching is probably the TV movie in 1996. But the Sea Devils had it's one of the, because it's burnt so much into my mind as an image, I count that as my first, because whilst that is the only bit I can remember of all the things that happened in my childhood on TV, for that to be ingrained so much into my mind, even just as one image, it obviously had an impact. So it's definitely the Sea Devils.
Cracking choice. And my last being, as in like my last is the last Doctor Who story you watched. So in terms of that, could be watching Revolution of the Daleks on New Year's Day, or have you watched something since then?
It was Revolution of the Daleks, would have been the last one I watched. Usually, occasionally, I might put something on. If I'm making a figure from a particular story, I might sort of put the story on. But no, Revolution of the Daleks was the last one I watched, which I loved. I thought it was really good. There's a few, I think, like most people, there was a few bits that I was a bit sort of not sure about. That worked particularly well, but there was quite a bit of it, I think. The majority, the story as a whole, I think, worked very well, and I
had a lot of fun with it.
It certainly set up a lot of things. I mean, the one thing I would have not trying to anger any fans of the Doctor and Yasmin getting together. Not trying to anger any of you. Don't hate me. But I think what I would have loved to have seen, Graham and Ryan stay and Yaz leave, but. I would have loved to have seen Yaz leading to a series of Torchwood where she joins Torchwood, because her scenes with Jack were absolutely there was everything about that screamed Torchwood to me. And so I would say if she left, my only stipulation was that it would have to have led to another series of Torchwood, because I think that would have been the perfect place for her to be. Because now that I don't know how up to I don't know how up to date you keep with Big Finish's Torchwood. Spoiler alert for those, but basically in
here and there
in one of the more recent Big Finish Torchwood, it reveals that Gwen has actually left Torchwood. Like she's left, gone. She's not died, she's just left. But then it was interesting that Jack, she's referenced by Jack in Revolution of the Daleks. So even though she's left, she's still there. But I like is the whole point of Gwen started out as just a normal police officer, and then she was introduced into the world of Torchwood. You could have, if Yaz had left and gone to work with Jack at Torchwood, you could have basically not rebooted, but you could have reintroduced Torchwood to a new audience in the same way, on the basis that she's just a normal police officer. But she's got now the experience of the Doctor that Gwen didn't. Gwen was entirely new to the concept of aliens and things like that, whereas Yaz would go to work with Jack at Torchwood and have that same sort of rookie police officerness to her, but she would also be completely unfazed by all the alien stuff.
Yeah,
which would be
a pretty cool concept for a Series 5 of Torchwood. Because let's face it, John Barrowman wants it to happen. The fans want it to happen. I mean, the likelihood of it actually happening now, I think, is always realistically very slim. But in that one sliver of hope that the BBC are like, yeah, fuck it, let's do it. So
it would be fantastic. I mean, I would be happy to see Torchwood come back as a series of specials or something like that. You don't have to have a full series. You just have a Torchwood hour-and-a-half special or something like that. Just to give the fans something. Because you look at producing Doctor Who, or another good example would have been, okay, so let's say they decide to give Doctor Who a break for another year and a half, just to let the actors go off and do other things, and that's fair enough. In that time, utilise the filming crew, not the cast, the crew, to film a Torchwood special. A one-off Torchwood special, because then that's keeping the crew employed. Obviously, not that they won't have other things to work on, but if the whole point is you want to give the cast and the crew a bit of a relaxation from Doctor Who, keep them on Doctor Who, but in the keep them in the Doctor Who universe, but make something different and have an hour-and-a-half Torchwood special for something.
Yeah. No, that's cool. So, yeah, if anyone from the BBC's listening, there you go. There's your pitch. And the last part, obviously, my first, my last, and as Barry always says, my everything. So, which is, say you've got all of the Doctor Who stories lined up in front of you, and someone says, you've got to pick one, all the rest are going to be destroyed, washed away, whatever, as in your everything. What is the one Doctor Who story you think you couldn't live without?
Can I give two answers to that? Because I'm determined to answer that as a trick question. Because I was about to. You said I've got every Doctor Who story lined up in front of me, so I'm going to take that to say, well, that means we found all the missing ones. So keep Evil.
Why not?
Keep Evil of the Daleks and scrap everything else.
Oh,
that's the one story. The Evil of the Daleks. Well, Power of the Daleks was always my top missing story that I wanted, and then they made it, so now it's Evil of the Daleks. So yeah, if we can get it back, that's it. Just keep Evil of the Daleks. It's not the best story in the world, but I just love the design work on it. But of all of the stories, all of them together, if I had to scrap one of them, if I had to keep one of them and scrap the rest,
it's a big question.
It is
I know I've put nearly 60 years of history on you there, but
I genuinely don't know. That's a very. It
is a hard question to this. I know I'd struggle as well because there's so many contenders like that I'd pick.
I tell you what, I would keep Dalek, the ninth, the first one that they came back in series 1, their return episode, simply because no matter how many times I watch that episode, there are better episodes out there and there are far worse episodes out there. But every single time I've watched Dalek, that moment where, he's in the room he doesn't know it's a Dalek. He's in the room and you just see the blue light, and then you just hear the Dalek go, "Doctor," and then it lights up. every single time I watch that, it sends shivers down my spine. And it's such an iconic scene. And the reason, I think, partly is because when the series came back, I didn't used to watch the next time trailers because I wanted it to be a surprise. And then I tuned into Dalek late, so I didn't see the title sequence. So I tuned it in right as the Cyberman, they showed the Cyberman head, and I was like, oh, they're going to do a return to the Cybermen. So when I saw the blue light, my initial thought was that it was some sort of Cyberman head light or chest unit. Yeah. And then you hear the Dalek speak, and that was just floored me because it was the one that I just wasn't expecting it at all. It was one of those things. Every time I rewatch that now, I get that same sense of anticipation from that. So I think I think that's the thing. As much as I would hate to see every other story junked, if I'm going to keep a story, I'm going to keep a story that gives me that sense of excitement every time I watch it.
Yeah,
even if it's just one scene.
It is a brilliant 45 minutes of telly, Dalek. And of course, in a month or so, it's getting its own Target book release by the author, Robert Shearman, which I'd actually be very interested to see how he's embellished it further or what more he's going to sort of reveal in it. That'll definitely be a read I'm going to catch up on. So no, great. So you got the Sea Devils, you got Revolution, and you've got Dalek. That's a great trio there. Yeah. And another thing I like to ask guests who Doctor Who fans, because I always find it interesting what different people say, is, as you know, in the collective fandom, when you look back on stories, there'll be some stories where, let's say, the majority or the wide range of the fandom will go, yeah, this one's not very good, but you might be like, I actually quite like it. So my question is there a story that you love or enjoy that the wide consensus is, oh no, that one's the bad one? Like the example I give for me is Twin Dilemma. The one where everyone's like, this is the worst story ever. And I'm like, well, I actually kind of like it, sort of thing.
Well, I'm in the class of people, the worst story ever is Orphan 55, followed closely by Time Lash. Which, for those interested, for those listening, I did post literally yesterday a breakdown of why I think that. I won't go into that on the podcast unless you want me to, but no, I agree with you. I say the Twin Dilemma because it's not... I can understand why people don't like it as a story. General plot-wise, it's very weak. But as a regeneration story, I think it's got some of the absolutely brilliant moments for the newly regenerated Doctor. Because when you look through the series, I mean, the first Doctor, he's a bit of a grumpy old man. The second Doctor was sort of that lovable, impish rogue. Third Doctor was the lovable old man. The fourth Doctor was that slightly goofy clown with a slightly dark quality, but darkness in a sense of he was always smiling in the face of evil. The fifth Doctor was youthful and brightful. And then you had the sixth Doctor come along, and he tries to strangle his companion to death. Yeah. And it's like, it's this dark element to the Doctor that we'd never seen before. And I think in a way, it's sort of also why I have that appeal of Trial of a Time Lord, is because it would have been very easy for them to say, oh, it's regeneration trauma, he's fine, he's still the same lovable rogue. It's like, no, this Doctor is dark. I mean, I can't remember which book it is. There's one of the books, I think it was not one of the more recent ones, it was like one of the New Virgin New Adventures novel, or one of those, that actually says that it was the sixth Doctor was the first one who believed the ends justified the means, or that murder was a necessary evil. And you look at it and think, it goes against everything that the Doctor at that point stands for. So to have that actual realised as part of the series, I think is an incredibly bold move. But it makes the Twin Dilemma stand out as a story for that reason. Again, a bit like Trial of a Time Lord. You could cut out all of the stuff with the actual twins and Mesler, or whatever his name is. Cut all that out and keep all the scenes with the Doctor, and you'd have a fantastic story.
Yeah. And I think, my take on it is, because I found it the same when Capaldi took over. Like you say, those regeneration stories are a great opportunity to introduce either different or darker or, whatever, new elements, basically, to this character we've known for so long. And I get, I think a lot of us, and I've done it before as well, you get used to a character's, basic traits. Like, yes, they're played by different people, but ultimately they have, the same core 3 or 4 traits. And I think part of me thinks it's like a reactionary thing when people say like the Twin Dilemma's bad because the Sixth Doctor's a bit, off the rails. But I'm like, well, it's like, Three Generations meant to be this like traumatic thing that like can mess you up. Then why shouldn't we explore more darker elements of the character's nature? Or same with Capaldi. Like I remember everyone said, he doesn't care about anyone and he's very brash. And I always said, well, at that point, he's a 2,000-year-old being who, he's encountering humans who keep making like the same mistakes in his eyes. So of course he's going to be pissed off. Of course he's going to be like, no, sod it. Like if you're not going to take heed, like the moment always stands out to me is Into the Dalek, where, or in moments where, he had to sacrifice that guy to get rid of the defense drones. And he just sort of says, oh, well, he was dead anyway. And I always like that line because it's like, that's a Doctor who realizes that, he can't save everyone, which some Doctors are in denial of. And that works as well. The playing, I want to save everyone. That's a great heroic trait to play. But I equally like those moments when we see the Doctor acknowledges
the futility
someone in this circle has to go. He doesn't want them to go, but he's
got to. Yeah. But the thing is as well, it's like, that's a perfect example. Like you said, it's like people look at it and go, he doesn't care and things like that. But the thing is like you said, he recognises just the simple fact of the situation. He cuts out the debate of should we do this, shouldn't we? Because the bottom line is you should. But then the flip side of that is people turn around and go, he doesn't care. And I look at the scene when he tricks Clara into thinking that she's chucked all the TARDIS keys into a volcano and she's betrayed him.
Yeah.
And then there's the bit where he turns around and he says, do you really think I care so little for you that betraying me would make a difference? And I look at that and I said, that's a perfect example of it. He turns around and he looks like he doesn't care, but he goes beyond that. He cares so much that he doesn't see the point in showing he doesn't care.
Yeah.
That's the point. He it's the bigger picture, like you said. It's the sacrificing the one guy. He says, right, that guy's got to die. And everyone goes, how can you say that? He says, because that guy's got to die so I can save the rest of you. Yeah.
I mean, it's one of many reasons why Series 8 is my favourite New Who season, just because I think it sort of delved into territories they didn't do before, and it sort of wasn't, initially anyway, it wasn't afraid to do that. That was, to fair credit to Stephen Moffat, was going to be like, I'm going to do some like darker stuff or stuff you're not used to, and that's okay. And I was like, I like that. And I think for me at least, where I was in life, like when Capaldi started, I just started university, and I don't know, I think I was ready for those sort of more, growing up on David Tennant, Matt Smith, especially with Smith being more like whimsical stories, which are great. But I think I was ready for that big shift from like the end of Series 7 to the start of Series 8. And I think a lot of people sort of knee-jerked to it. Because again, as we said, it's that, this is so different, so it must be bad. It's like, well, no,
it's like,
not necessarily.
It's the 11th Doctor's tales. I mean, it's like, you look at things like, for example, Name of the Doctor. It's an incredibly dark episode, but you look at the majority of his episodes, and if I had to sort of, like you said, whimsical, there's almost a sort of fairy tale element to it, to his existence. Yeah. And then you have the 8th Doctor, the 12th Doctor, Series 8, becomes very dark. And I think, as you said, it's the knee-jerk reaction that you've gone from this sort of quite sort of light, comedic, fairy tale, whimsical world to this really sort of dark, rebellious. Well, it's what was it Peter Capaldi first described his look as Time Lord Rebel, this very sort of rebellious, punkish, dark world, and I think that's why you said, I think that's why people had that knee-jerk reaction, is because it just went from one extreme to it went from being a sort of family-friendly thing that you could see, you watch most of the 11th Doctor stories and there's nothing there that you think, that's not really unsuitable for kids. And then you got to Capaldi's series, and they really went for the sort of hell for leather family. It's a family show. It's meant to be dark at times. It's not meant to be suitable for children, whilst at the same time, it's not meant to be solely for adults. Yeah,
quite. No, absolutely. I mean, I could spend 3 hours or more debating why Series 8 is the best thing ever. I'll have to save that for a separate video. And the last main question I wanted to ask you, which again is something I'm trying to ask most of my guests who come on who are into Doctor Who, because we've all thought this at some point in our lives. If you had the keys to the franchise, Jimmy, what would you want to do with it?
Whatever I could to piss off the fans. No. Well, no. To be fair, that's not strictly untrue, because I've always thought. I mean, Russell T Davies didn't get a huge amount of flack, but Stephen Moffat got so much, and obviously Chibnall gets tons. But I look at it and think, like, do you know what? If I was in their shoes, it would probably be the same, because I would be doing with the series what I think is best. And fans would complain because it's not what they want. And I think the fundamental reason is, if you give the fans the keys to the TARDIS or the keys to the show, then it would be an absolute mess, because no fan can agree on what the show is. It's different to everyone else. So I think what the show would be to me would be very different to other people. But I think it would be small things. I think my idea of the series would be, it would be introduce new things, like as the series should, but have a lot of callbacks to past series. A perfect one I always thought was, for example, in the pilot, when Bill and the Doctor, they go to the sort of, they find themselves in the middle of the Mavellan Dalek conflict, and it was great to see the Mavellans back, and then you have the Dalek there. But I looked at that and I thought, so the principle is, that is the Mavellan Dalek conflict is still going on after the Time War. That's why it's a Bronze Dalek. But I thought, why didn't they have a classic grey renegade and say, no, they've gone back in time to the past when the war was still going on, and you could have had a classic Dalek in there all of a sudden, and it would have been such a very simple reference to have that would have pleased fans immensely, because you would have still ended up with a Dalek in it, but it would have been, surprise, it's a classic Dalek, and this is actually the Mavellans at the same time as other stuff was going on. And it was something, again, another one I pointed out was, again, in my breakdown of why I don't like Orphan 55. It's like the character of the Hyphen, the one with furs and the tails and things like that. I looked at it and think, I don't understand the point of her character. I thought, why didn't they make her a cat kind from series 2? Or, better yet, why didn't they make her a cheetah person from Survival? Yeah. And you think, a simple reference like that, it would have just pleased fans immensely and things like that. And it's like, when I look at like the stories, like you look at Asylum of the Daleks and The Magician's Apprentice and Witch's Familiar, seeing all those classic Daleks back was great, and it was great to think, oh look, there's that Dalek, but they didn't do anything with them. They didn't. Yeah. All of the exposition was done by new series Daleks.
Yeah, it's almost like I don't know. Obviously, unless any of us were there, we don't know the full reason. But it's almost like they were happy enough to have them, more so in the Magician's Apprentice one, because in Asylum I remember being a bit disappointed how, it was so hyped up in promotion, like every Dalek ever, and then it was properly, like a blink and you'll miss it. Oh, yeah. Look, there's a grey Dalek in the background there. It's almost like, for whatever reason, they're afraid to make those classic Daleks front and centre. And like, I know, yes, like from a design point of view, yes, a Dalek's a Dalek, and they might think, oh, but the old ones look a bit tatty or whatever, but I always thought, say take your concept with the whole Mavellan thing, have a grey renegade, but the circular lens, all you have to do, I think, is put like a light on it so it lights up like the current ones do, and make the effect look like the ray guns they are now. It doesn't have to be exactly 100% classic like it was in 1979. You can update it while still maintaining the look, exactly, but making it modern.
Well, a perfect example of that I've noticed was in Spyfall, when you had Sacha Dhawan, huge reveal as the Master, fantastic. But when he had his tissue compression eliminator, they used the classic sound effect. And I was like, that's it. That's all you needed. You just needed one thing to say, look, he's got tissue compression eliminator. It's a handheld device rather than it's not like a point one. It's almost looks like a vape sort of thing, But you look at it and think but they put in the classic sound effect. That's all you needed. That was it. It was just that way of getting you don't want the classic fans to go, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. You just want the classic fans to go, hey, I recognise that noise. And that's it. That's all you need. I think part of the issue, maybe not so much these days, but in days gone by, I think the problem was a lot of the new series fans weren't well acquainted with the classic series. So you couldn't have a lot of references like that, because it would have been things that would have gone over their heads. But I think now, with all of classic Doctor Who being on BritBox and the fact that the Doctor Who community has grown so big again, if you can have those references in it, because people will understand them if they see it. I mean, if that Mavellan thing, if you plonked a grey renegade Dalek in there, people who hadn't seen the classic series wouldn't have gone, oh, why have they changed the design of the Daleks? They would have gone, oh, that's a classic Dalek. They would have recognised it in some form, So I think if I had the keys to the series, it would be introduce more classics and things like that. The one thing that I would be I would refuse to take the helm unless they allowed me to have a companion who wasn't from 21st century Earth. And I'm not saying they've got to be an alien. I'm not saying they've got to be, have 3 heads and be blue or anything like that. But you look at companions like, for example, Leela. She looked like an ordinary human, but she was an alien from another planet. Romana, Time Lady. Or Victoria, or Vicky, from, the first and second Doctor's era. Vicky, human, but from the future. Same with Zoe. Victoria, human, but from the past. Anywhere that isn't 21st century modern day Earth. That's all I'd want.
Yeah.
Because you could have a much different dynamic that, it's like, there's lots of things like someone from 21st century Earth goes off to an alien world and they're not going to understand it, fair enough. But someone from the distant future doesn't necessarily understand how the past works. Someone from the past doesn't understand how the future works. You can still have that.
Yeah, it's almost like they stick to some templates, because I know, like, I get it when they rebooted it in 2005, because, you want a 21st century audience. Probably the best way to get them relating is with a 21st century person.
Absolutely.
I get that. And but yeah, I do think it'd be nice to see a bit of branch out. It's the same in vein, how they say with a new companion, they've done the modern trend of doing I can't remember if they've done it in Jodie's era, but like the modern trend of doing, like, right, so the first story is in their time, second one's in the future, and then the third one's in the past, or vice versa, which is a great trend to show a 21st century Earth person, like, look, it's the future, look, it's the past. But it'd be nice, to see either an alien or just someone different, where you don't necessarily have to do that cycle in that order.
No, it'd just be interesting. I'm just trying to think about Jodie's stories. I think obviously,
Ghost Monument was kind of that was the future, wasn't it?
It was futuristic. It wasn't.
And the third one was Rosa in the past. So
her first series, certainly. Spyfall, obviously, that's a 2-parter opener. So
and that was here, there, and everywhere in terms of time zones. So
but that was nice. But actually,
it was.
Actually, if you think about it, first episode was present day. Second episode, past and future. So it sort of still works,
Yeah. No, but I agree with you. It'd be nice to see a different sort of companion. But there you go, folks. An insight into how Jimmy would change things. Just little small things. It's always interesting, again, because some people have, quite big ideas or big changes they'd want to make. And some are just little small things. So it's interesting to hear different people's opinions. But I think we'll start to wrap things up there. This has been... I've enjoyed this conversation massively. I hope you have too for your first time.
Absolutely, yes.
And this is the part of the show, of course, all your social medias, or your YouTube, or your work, whatever. If you want to plug it, feel free to do so now.
Basically, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, all under @Captain Jimipie. It's not. I try to keep it nice and consolidated and simple. Yeah, but please go follow, subscribe. I'm sure you'll find something there to suit what you like. If you're a Doctor Who fan, there will be something somewhere. There will be many things that you like, but knowing me, there's probably going to be a few things that you don't like. But I speak my mind. What can I say?
If it encourages a equal debate, then that sounds good to me. As long as it's a friendly debate. So, but no, and you picked a good name as well. Trust me, going with Adam Martyn, a common name. The loopholes I've had to jump through have been incredible.
I can imagine.
But honestly, Jimmy, you've been a fantastic guest to have on, and I'm so pleased you decided to make this one your first podcast. I'm really humbled that you decided to.
It's been a privilege. It's been certainly very interesting. I'm always available if you want to do another one in future.
There you go. See, anyone listening who also does podcasts, this guy is available. So on my end, this is where I've got to try and remember all my things now. If you are watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you're new, or if you've watched my stuff over a period of time. Like it as well. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this here chat. And if you're listening on audio, so Spotify, Google, Apple, again, thank you very much. Please give us a follow on there. We've got new episodes coming every week as part of season 2, and it's very much appreciated that you listen to us. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Twitter specifically is Adam Martyn Actor, because, you know, I clearly have to state that, apparently. But yeah, that's where you can find me. And until the next one, I shall see you all next time.